Hey everyone, my name is Koen Peters and I'm a student here at Tilburg University. A couple of months ago, I heard about the theme today for the first time, living limitless, and it got me very confused because I'm not really familiar with any world that is without limits. And that's saying something because I've been reading fantasy for as long as I can remember. I know tons of worlds and none of them are limitless, least of all ours. And yet, I don't find this is a problem. I actually love these limits, and not just because I'm a mathematician. Let me tell you why. Back when I was younger, I was very aware of one of my limits. I couldn't talk to people. Now, I know there's a simple introversion, but back then, it seemed like the end of the world. I was a teenager after all. I couldn't speak up in class, I would dread team assignments, and I even had a speech impediment on the side. Whenever I had to initiate a conversation, I would get so nervous, so flustered, that I would say the whole sentence as if it were just one word. Needless to say, people had no idea what I was saying, and I generally had to repeat myself twice, thrice, sometimes even 4 times. I wasn't very happy with these limits, so I sought to do something about it, and I set myself a goal. I would learn how to talk. And that's exactly what I did. Over the years, I kind of taught myself how to talk by reading about talking, by observing people talking. At some points, I even talked. And again, I kept approaching my limits, always trying to go one step further, like how often could I start a conversation without having to repeat myself? Or how long could I actually tell a story? Even the amount of interaction that I could survive before I get a headache. I kept pushing against these limits, always trying to go one step further. Those limits and the resulting journey are what brought me here today, giving a TEDx talk of all things. I love limits. They can really help you set yourself a goal, and they can help you to become the person that you want to become. Now, as this is a TED talk, I would like to share with you the idea that has propelled my personal development for the past 7 odd years. And it's a very simple idea, that any limit can be broken. I believe that you can learn anything that you want to learn, become anyone that you want to become, if you put your mind to it. And you're in luck, because we'll even tell you how to do so. Now, before we start talking about breaking all of these limits, let us first talk about the basics. What is a limit? I find that I can actually summarize my opinion on personal limits using just 2 words. Limit schmimit. Limit is a very inaccurate word because it seems to imply that you've reached the end or upper bound of something. You know, that's what a limit is in mathematics. And if there's one thing that people don't like to hear, is that they can't do something. So rather than look at limits as if they're insurmountable, let's look at them more dynamically. Limits are a current upper bound. And to that end, I actually proposed a new term when we speak and think about our personal limits. That new term is a high score. High scores are your best performance so far. High scores can be improved, they're even meant to be improved. All it takes is a bit more effort and perhaps a dose of luck. High scores are also very measurable, it makes it easy for you to set goals. For instance, if you set out to break the limit of not being able to talk, what should you do? It's very hard to determine what you should do and what your goal should be. But if I rephrase it as, okay, I can carry a conversation for 4 minutes, then the next time I have a conversation, I can work towards that 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes. And if you keep breaking these high scores attached to these limits, you'll find that at some point, you're no longer limited in your ability to do so, which is, of course, what we set out to do. Now, for this TED Talk, I kind of tried to analyze what I've been doing for the past years, trying to see how I managed to break my own limit. And in doing so, I also reflected on other people who did the same thing, trying to figure out what are the commonalities, what makes people able to break through all of their limits. And actually managed to distinguish 3 commonalities, 3 characteristics, that all of these people seem to have in common. So I figured, okay, I'll just dress them up nicely and call them a principle. So here you have it, the principle of breaking high scores. And it's based on 3 characteristics. The first one is trust, the trust in oneself and one's abilities. We've got eagerness, or desire to improve, and diligence, persistent effort towards a goal. And note that the deviation of the 3 characteristics is, of course, purely coincidental. Let me briefly explain what I mean with each of the characteristics. So first we have trust, the trust in oneself and one's abilities. If from the get-go you don't believe that you are able to change, then most likely you will not succeed. Henry Ford actually phrased this beautifully in one of his quotes. He said, whether we think you can or whether you think you cannot, you're right. Now this trust or this self-confidence is relatively easy to develop if you do not believe in yourself yet. There's actually a couple of very good TED Talks on the subject. One by Amy Cuddy comes to mind. She explains to us how we can use our body language to actually become more confident. The second characteristic is eagerness, or the desire to improve. Especially when we look at limits as if they're simply high scores in disguise. And you see them everywhere, because everything you've ever done has the best performance so far. It has a high score. So the trick is to find those high scores that actually are limiting, those that are in your way of becoming who you want to become. For instance, I cannot jump very high. I've got a very low high score on that account, but this doesn't stop me from becoming who I want to become. So I have no incentive of actually working on my high score of jumping very high. So you have to find those high scores that actually are important to you. I call them restrictive high scores. Which brings to the third characteristic, the actual do something about them, diligence, the persistent effort towards a goal. I think there's hundreds of sayings, phrases, proverbs, and quotes in pretty much every language known to man that come down to one simple fact. If you want to achieve something worthwhile, you're going to have to put in some effort. Here's my favorite quote. All the secrets of success will not work unless you do. Now, this diligence, I admit, is the hardest of the characteristics to actually develop. Even if you are very eager to change, it can be very hard to find enough time to actually do it. If that is the case, I would recommend working on your time management high scores first. So now we've got this principle of breaking high scores, which kind of tells us the attitude that we need if we want to break through all of our high scores. We've got trust, or I can do this. We've got eagerness, I want to do this. And diligence, I actually will do this. And if we take this into mind, we have the right attitude to get cracking, to get started on actually breaking our high scores. And yet, even when we set out to break our high scores, this doesn't necessarily mean that we will achieve and that we will actually be able to do so. There's hundreds of things that can go wrong, both inside and outside of your control. You could wake up sick, you get in a traffic jam, your nerves get the better of you, you could have technical difficulties. There's just so many things that can go wrong. Inevitably, they will. To give you an example, about 2 months ago, I had finished one of my earliest drafts of my TED Talk, and I figured, okay, it's good the way it is, let's give it a try. So I rang a couple of friends and asked them to join me for a test run of my speech, to look at the delivery, to look at the content, if it matched what they were expecting. So I was standing there in front of my friends, presentation slides ready, a nice clicker in my hand, tea on the side, nerves under control, everything was going well, according to preparations. Do you know what happened? I blacked out. Several times. I simply couldn't recall my speech, all my beautifully crafted paragraphs, my punchlines, they were all gone, which is very frustrating. I had to struggle throughout the whole presentation, it didn't really work out, and I was very disappointed by the end. But yet, even though I didn't succeed in doing what I set out to do, which was giving a nice presentation, I did learn a lot from this failure. I learned what I need to do to prepare better for the next time, which is today. Whenever you try to set out to break your high scores, things will go wrong. You will fall on your face very often, and you will have to pick yourself up again and again and again. So it is very important that you actually find something that will help you to do this. For me, there was always one thing that helped me to pick myself up again and again, that helped me to keep pushing against my limits. And that one thing was indifference, of all things. I found that it's very hard to put into words the technique that I use when I'm breaking my limits. I think I wrote about 20 different versions just for this speech, but I'm actually quite happy with the latest version, so here we go. I call my technique the Rationalized indifference. And the core idea of rationalized indifference is that whenever you set out on a journey to break your high scores, it doesn't matter what the outcome is. All that matters is that you put yourself out there, you try, and you try to force change. Now, every day, we have to make tons of decisions. Some you make in a split second, and some can take minutes, hours, or even weeks to contemplate. The decisions of interest, when we are breaking our high scores, are where we have to decide on an opportunity where we can actually break one of these high scores. Now, for some of these high scores, this means that you have an hour to spare. Others, they need social interaction or even competition. And when you try to decide whether you should take this opportunity, you will start running scenarios through your mind. trying to figure out, okay, should I do this or should I not? And what I found is that especially when you are dealing with your restrictive high scores, people are very indecisive because it's very hard. There's a lot of cons of actually putting yourself out there, And it always seems like there are these two voices in your head. I call them my should-do voice and my shouldn't-do voice, that keep bickering without really coming to a conclusion. Your should-do voice is the one that tells you how awesome it will be if it works out, how much you could learn from the experience, that sort of thing. And the shouldn't-do voice is the one that tells you of shame. It tells you of awkwardness. It's the one that tells you that it probably wouldn't work out anyway. And the thing is that if we remain indecisive for long enough, our shouldn't-do voice wins. Because if you remain indecisive for long enough, then nothing happens and the opportunity passes. And yet we are eager for change. We trust in ourselves. We want to change. So this indecisiveness is simply not in our best interest. The next time that you face such indecisiveness, I want you to throw caution to the wind. I want you to listen to your should-do voice. And I want you to become indifferent towards whatever may happen. I want you to become indifferent towards whatever may happen. Because in this way, we can force change. The status quo is simply not good enough. Indifference will not do. We force change. Over the years, I kind of learned how to trust in my should-do voice. So whenever I figure out, okay, I should be doing this, I commit. I simply do not allow myself to back down anymore. And I found that this commitment has actually helped me to deal with the nerves and the worries that plagued me so much in the past. They kind of seem to lose their edge. These worries and these nerves, they lose their edge because you, a rational human being, have already determined you should be doing this. You've committed. There is no way back. So these worries that now form your thoughts don't have anything useful to add anymore because you have already committed. You know you should be doing this. Whatever happens, happens. Trust in the rational human being that came up with this plan in the first place. Trust that you made the right call when you signed up for this. And do. Let us go back to the theme of the day for a minute and ask ourselves the question, what is living limitless? I do not think that we will ever live truly limitlessly. I even hope so, because limits are of far greater importance to us than we seem to realize. They can really show us what we want to be able to do, who we want to become. And yet the limits of today, they are so different from the ones that we face tomorrow, because if we keep exploring, if we keep expanding and breaking our high scores, then there's nothing that we cannot do. Limits or no limits. I want you to join me on this journey of breaking our high scores. I want you to believe, as I do, that you can learn anything that you want to learn. Become anyone that you want to become. Trust in your should-do voice, because it's right more often than you'd think. Don't be afraid to allow yourself to become indifferent, because this indifference will make all the difference. Thank you. Thank you.